Preparing live streaming. Preparing live streaming. And we are live. Si George Bagsao, nandyan na.
Hi, good afternoon. George.
Good afternoon, mga ka-Pix Pro. Hi, Darwin. Hi, Ralph. Ralph Rosael. Have Mike Angelo Matrido. Uy. Hi.
Oy, good afternoon, mga suki. Mr. Ralph. Mr. Mike. Good afternoon, Mr. Rogen. Brother Darwin. Good afternoon. So, this afternoon, we have a very interesting topic. Malware evasion. Very highly technical, no? And for many, malwares are a big challenge. And for most organizations, this is always a difficulty to address and arrest. Especially lately, grabe ang tinaas ng mga malware cases. Mr. Carlo, good afternoon. Mr. Jax, Troy Santana is watching. Okay. Alas Pix Pro na naman. Tambay na ulit tayo mga ka-cyber. So, please indicate your location so that we can greet you wherever you are. Ako, nandito ako sa magandang bayan ng Binyan. Binyan City. Afternoon, Miss Vicky.
Yeah, good afternoon, sir. I think some of our partners are also watching here, especially sila Sir Mike Matrido and others.
Yan, sila Mike Matrido, partners mo pala. Mr. Errol Roque, kumusta ka dyan? Si Rogen, nasa Cavite. Bukas, nandyan ako sa bayan ng Cavite. Magiging Caviteño ako bukas. Mr. Larry Umila II. Good afternoon, brother. Mr. Ver Bilarde is also watching. Good afternoon. Alan DJ or Alan De Jesus is also watching. Ito, kapatid natin. Our brother in Cyber Arms also, Mr. Mario De Marillas. Good afternoon. VP Alex, baka may kwento ka dyan. May marites ka ba?
VP Alex, na-miss ka namin, ah.
Saan?
Na-miss ko ba kami? Dito, sa KC.
Kailan ba ako nag-absent? Absent pa ako na nakaraan. Sa dami ng ano eh. I have a lot of customer engagement.
Ay, yung aking pinsan sa Cebu, si Cheryl. Ate Yao, good evening. So, nakwento ko kanina, di ba, yung aming interns. I always say na cybersecurity to me is biblical. No? Many are called, but few are chosen. So, we started with 200 students. You know, Guy, in our company, we launched an internship program. Instead of OJT, on the job training wherein they just required to do 200, 400 hours, which is really useless because they can't learn anything. So we signed a deal with one of the schools, the Asia Pacific College, to send their graduating students for 6 months. And for 3 months, we do lectures. The next 3 months, they are immersed in our governance, special operations, internal cybersecurity operations, etc. So from 200, we shortlisted 51. From 51, we shortlisted 25. And the 25, when we explained to them how the internship will go, only 19 confirmed. And the 19 students, they didn't know each other because they were coming from different courses, no? Because we didn't just take from the computer courses. Other courses also were open. So they were emotional earlier, having gone through the 6 months everyday learning. No? But then these 19 students, when they graduate, they can hit the ground running, and companies can hire them without the need of sending them to trainings, because they can be used right away for 6 months that they are with us.
Is this all in person or is there online component?
Everything was virtual. Everything was online.
Yeah.
Because we are operating remotely as well since the pandemic.
Even the 3 months of actual hands-on is
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
Maybe we should talk afterwards, because I'm looking for a program that's similar to what you're doing for us to be able to train some people on our side, because we're getting some new young people coming in who don't have a background. They're trying to find a good virtual program to do this. So maybe we should have a
Sure.
conversation afterwards. Okay. Maybe I'll even take it. Is there a certificate that comes afterwards?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of, well, there's the certificate of completion,
Okay.
and then there's also the CSOG badge. We have a badge wherein you are evaluated by the subject matter experts, and you have to reach a certain level of criteria for you to be able to get the badge. So
I might even try taking this class. This could be fun.
Yeah. And also, Chairman, it's also good to hear po that you have that kind of initiative pala, because currently right now in Stanford, Philippines, we're looking for 3 technical interns. So I think some of your student members can also join. So after the
definitely.
internship, it could be 5 to 6 months, and then they will be ready for absorption if the performance is good.
Wow. Don't worry, because our next the next batch will be coming from different schools, and will be bigger in terms of number. So let's just greet our Mr. Eric De Jesus. Good afternoon. Mr. Antonio Soriano is watching. Ito, my other cousin in Mindanao, Sambuanga Sibugay. Si Mr. Marvin Falcasantos Babiera. He works with Land Bank. He is the guy to talk to when it comes to Land Bank in our area. Mr. Del Sandugo, Ian J. Sapalaran, Arnold Dava, Rendon. Long live Pix Pro. Yeah, long live Pix Pro. Michael Placa is watching also. Good afternoon. Victoria Kasipit is watching. Jingo Javilles is watching. Ito na naman yung pangalan na mahirap banggitin. Kiev Buz. Mr. Kiev Buz, good afternoon, bro. Marvin Howe, hello from IT Depot Inc. Davao. Good afternoon. Maayong hapon diya sa Davao. Hapit na muli diha inyong presidente. And yeah, si Mike is from Sangfor, a partner of Sangfor. So, si Vice Chair is joining us. Mr. Vice Chair. Are you with us?
You,
Oh,
move,
this
you,
is-
move, you move the glass, Vice Chair, if you're here.
If you're with us, please move the glass. I cannot unmute. Ask to unmute. Oh, bakit? Why can you not unmute? Yeah. Make co-host. I think there's a problem with the vice chair. Okay, I think VP Mia, we are 2 minutes past 5. And would you like to kick off?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you.
The floor is yours.
Good afternoon again, everyone. So today we have another interesting topic to talk about. It's all about malware evasion and why it works. No? And we're glad to have with us our partner, our new tech partner rather, Sangfor. So everyone has probably deployed next generation antivirus, endpoint detection, response, etc. But yet, ransomware and APTs, they still infiltrate organizations, and it's still a problem for us today. So in this Kwentuhang Cybersecurity, Sangfor will discuss the most common tech gen malware uses to evade detection and provide recommendations on what your protection should do to better detect and block the sneaky malware that we have today. We have Vicky from Sangfor, and she's based here in the Philippines. Hi, Vicky. Thanks for joining us. And our speaker for today is no other than Mr. Guy Roosevelt. He is the Security Chief Marketing Officer of Sangfor. Guy joined Sangfor in 2019 as our Product Marketing Director for Security. Previously serving as the Director of Threat Intelligence and Web Security Product Management for NS Focus. And with over 30 years experience, Guy is a leader and groundbreaker at the crux of a dynamic cybersecurity industry. So let us all welcome Mr. Guy Roosevelt. Over to you, guys.
Hello. Thank you very much for having me here. I appreciate the time. I'm going to talk about malware evasion and why it works. There's a lot of technical stuff in here. I'm going to skip over a bunch of slides to get to the high points in my 20 minutes, but we'll make the entire presentation available to you guys afterwards so that you guys can review all the technical backup slides that I don't talk about. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about malware evasion and how it works. When we talk about malware evasions, I'm going to show how this relates to a real-world attack, including how this happened through SolarWinds. We'll talk about how you need to use artificial intelligence to fight artificial intelligence, because that's the key thing here in terms of what malware is doing. And I'll give a couple takeaways. Okay, the first thing is, has your organization have the best of breed security products, firewalls, endpoint, whatever it is, and yet you still get hit by some kind of malware, APT attack, ransomware more than once? Why do you keep seeing a reoccurrence of a breach or an infection? And the reason why this happens is because hackers have gotten a lot smarter, and what they've done is they've weaponized artificial intelligence and put that into APTs and ransomware now to be able to make very, very smart, intelligent malware that can actually determine what it should do based upon the environment that it's in. And I'll talk a bit more about that little in just a few minutes. But what this can do now is it can identify your security environment, and it has the ability to now to stealthily circumvent pretty much all your security in your environment. And that's a very scary thing. The business impact here is, again, we're seeing a lot of ransomware, especially in the Philippines. Ransomware is almost 100% successful everywhere you go. It doesn't matter what you have, firewalls, endpoint, IPS, it's almost 100% successful in breaching an organization. And along with the ransomware, we're seeing a lot of data breaches where they're exfiltrating data, either part of the ransomware attack as a second wave, or to do other kinds of things such as industrial espionage and credential stealing. But it also allows the hackers to take control of the assets in your environment, your systems, your IoT, and other types of stuff. Now, this is a chart that shows you different categories of malware. But what's important to understand now is malware used to be monolithic. There was this one type of software that did its specific thing. A few years ago, right before the pandemic, attackers re-architected malware and made it more modular. So now what happens is malware has a stub that will infect your organization. That stub will call down one or more different kinds of payloads to different bad things, like turn it into ransomware or botnet or spyware or whatever it is that's going to be in there. So you can do multiple things at the same time. And that's the part that's very, very scary, is how you can do more than one thing at a time. And when you get rid of the secondary payload, you don't necessarily find the original stub. That stub sits there, and it's going to reinfect you over and over again so you can find the stub and get rid of it. Malware enters your organization fairly easily, either through phishing. 47 to 50% of all malware attacks come from phishing. But there are worms that can come in that take advantage of vulnerabilities in your environment, both system level, application level. There are exploit kits that can be installed through drive-by downloads, such as going to an infected website, clicking on a link, and bad things come down. Or we're seeing a lot more brute force attacks now where malware is using RDP, SSH, and other types of communication channels to try to break into systems to be able to install these packages. So we're seeing the smarter, intelligent, weaponized AI-based malware almost 100% successfully exploiting zero-day vulnerabilities in the wild. Signature-based detection systems not working because there are hundreds of thousands of malware variants every day that just basically overwhelm the signature database. So you're really not going to be able to find the signature quickly. And again, because what they do now is by being able to weaponize and modularize, they can now have more than one payload. So you may be looking for a certain kind of an attack and it does something else. When we respond to the something else attack, it may do a third kind of thing. So it's becoming very, very difficult to be able to respond quickly and easily to advanced persistent threat using existing tools. Here's an example. Almost all malware today has the ability to evade sandbox detection, because if you try to run a sandbox, the malware can easily detect that it's running in a virtual environment as opposed to on a physical system, because it looks for hardware checks, it looks for software checks. It will then just basically go to sleep for a while to determine whether or not someone's watching it. And then it'll fire back up again and say, am I still in the virtual environment? It'll go back to sleep again. It'll look at the user environment, looking at the the IP address, the domain you belong to. And based upon all of these kinds of things, it will make an assessment as to whether it is in the appropriate place to be able to launch an attack, or whether it's not in the appropriate place and you'll just go to sleep and become dormant for a period of time or forever. So when we look at zero-day vulnerabilities, there is a kill chain that comes with every kind of malware in terms of the steps it takes to infect the system. And the two biggest steps that we see is the initial access stage, which is the breach entry point, and how does it come in? Normally through vulnerabilities of devices, of software, especially browsers, and now logic vulnerabilities of applications. And then once that stub is infiltrated, it then goes to a privilege escalation stage, where it now tries to access your network by doing remote code execution and taking advantage of other vulnerabilities. The MITRE attack matrix does a very good job of showing you the different kinds of tactics and procedures being used by these types of organizations. And you can see here under initial access, exploiting public-facing applications, one of the top tier tactics that are being used by malware. And then they marry that with process injection. And process injection is very scary because if it's done properly, it can go undetected even by existing security software on your systems. So in the initial access stage, what they do is they want to exploit the vulnerabilities of any internet-facing application to get into the system. Normally they're using browsers. That's becoming the most common way of doing it right now. And they're using either phishing, again, or drive-by watering hole attacks by having you go to a website, clicking on the link and downloading some stuff. I'm not going to go through all of these, but there is just an idea of the kinds of exploits that we're seeing in the last year. And if you look over on the right side, you can even see which of the APT attack groups were using these particular kind of vulnerabilities. We've seen that browsers have become the most popular vector because browsers are not patched. Browsers have become vulnerable every day. And there is just so many of them in an organization, you can always find one that has an exploit that you can take advantage of. Kc-Sangfor's Blue Ops team, who does managed services and does incident response, interesting from our standpoint, we have seen two vectors, one coming from Microsoft Exchange Server, has been very, very popular in the last year, and also Mac remote access activities. So we've seen the stuff in the Apple WebKit for cameras, iPhones, Macs and stuff. So it's very interesting to see, again, where these vulnerabilities lie and how quickly they get exploited. In the privilege escalation stage, once I've been able to break in, I now want to be able to grab a firm foothold into the system. And I do that by basically trying to launch a process that will now give me root access or admin access to the organization. And again, there are a lot of vulnerabilities that are exploited to do this kind of stuff. Lots and lots of Windows vulnerabilities in terms of Windows system level vulnerabilities. And again, we've seen a lot of stuff on the Microsoft Exchange Server side that have been exploited to be able to get you root access or to be able to propagate to other systems within the network. Now, I want to stop here for a moment and talk about attack techniques. So there are four major attack techniques that malware uses to gain access to your organization and hide. And this is the part that's really interesting. So they do what's called bring your own binary, where basically it's a chain of tactics and techniques, usually in a package or in several packages that get installed on your system to be able to do the first initial access and then call down the other software to be able to do the privilege escalation. Once I've had the first access to do privilege escalation, I'm going to use local window processes. We use what's called living off the land attacks, which basically exploit Windows operating systems, or basically any operating system vulnerability in terms of applications, in terms of DLLs, or in terms of any modules that are used. And we've seen a lot of stuff happen in the past, especially if you remember last year we had a huge problem with the Windows principal vulnerability that was being exploited in the wild for several months. Once I've exploited the system, I need to hide my tracks. So we do what's called communication anti-tracing to be able to hide the fact that there's any existence of malware doing something bad in your environment. It basically hides the communication connections that it makes. It identifies if you're trying to monitor communications and basically will hide itself or shut itself off based upon that. And then malware has built-in operational security, looking to see how we can make sure that it does not get detected by doing a whole bunch of interesting things. So real quick, I want to talk about one type of bring your own binary called reflective DLL injection. And what this does is very interesting. What it will do is it's going to load a malicious DLL into memory. But the way it does this is it's actually going to take advantage, or it's going to exploit a legitimate process that runs in your environment. So what will happen is once malware tries to get in through the initial access stage, it will look at the list of processes running on your system. It will find a legitimate process that is compatible with what it wants to go do, and it will then suspend it. Once it suspends that process, it will actually remove all the code inside the process that's sitting in memory. Basically, just carves it out, follows it out. And then it will upload its own malicious code inside that process. Okay. Then it starts the process execution again. Now, as far as the system is concerned, it's still running a legitimate process, but all the code in there has been replaced and is now undetectable as being bad code. And that's a really scary thing, because if I went back and looked at the process, it would show a legitimate signature that says, yeah, this was run by a real application. It's just the code inside has been changed without you knowing about it. Living off the land binaries, again, goes into existing Windows, Unix, Linux type files, and it basically tries to exploit them, looking for things such as privilege escalation, being able to run remote command injection, and other types of stuff so that it can do things, especially with process injection. More importantly, if I try to exploit a operating system module or application, it is obviously considered to be a valid application that's running. So if I can use that application and I can exploit it, or I can steal the code that's inside of it and replace it with my own code, nothing's going to detect it, because again, it's run by a valid OS process, such that even Microsoft Defender would not be able to detect it. And that's a very scary thing. In fact, there is a script that is available on the internet right now that's used in some of these APTs called Defeat Defender. And what it does is it's a batch script that will completely disable all Windows Defender processes and bypass the new Windows tamper protection capability, which is not supposed to allow you to be able to stop the Defender process. And that's a very scary thing. When this script runs, it looks at all the stuff that's running in the environment. And again, it does some process modification. The process modification still looks like a real process to the operating system and to all the security stuff. And then what it does, it goes through, and you can see here, it disables all these functions inside of Windows, including the firewall, quick scan, smart screen. It adds some exceptions to the Defender settings, so Defender now will ignore files that are running when the malware gets downloaded, and it disables ransomware protection. And this is very scary, because the worst thing about this is you do not know that Windows Defender has been disabled. It's completely invisible to you. You would actually have to go and test things to find it, because it wouldn't even show up in the event viewer. Communication anti-tracing. So I need to go out now and I need to communicate to my command and control server to be able to exfiltrate data. Well, if I did it in an obvious manner, it'd be easily detected. So what we do now is we use what's called domain generated algorithms. And what it does is the malware will generate a domain based on an IP address, and you will go out and make queries on this domain. But the thing is, the host is based on a bunch of random data that does not make sense to you. What the data actually is, what the host actually is data that's been stolen, has been packaged, has been chopped up into little pieces, and then is appended to the DNS request. So what you see now is tens of thousands of DNS requests happening in a short period of time going to a specific domain. Of course, all those DNS requests fail because the host does not exist. And then what happens is the DNS server on the other end, which is actually the command and control server receiving all the requests, takes all the host names that came in and is able to reassemble all the data by removing it from the host portion of the DNS request, and that's how they exfiltrate data. It's a very, very interesting process how that works. But the way you can tell this is a domain generated algorithm type domain name is you'll see tens of thousands of DNS requests all resolving to the same IP address. So we know that's a problem. Almost all of them are not going to be resolved. If you actually look at the DNS request name, the host name doesn't make any sense. It's not human readable. You know, in most cases, the host name is something that makes sense to a person so they can understand what it is. But here it's just a random selection of letters and numbers. And what's interesting too is you'll see that in all these requests, this DNS name is only used one time and never used again. So it's very, very difficult to track this when this happens unless you're looking for a large burst of DNS requests that happen, say, in the middle of the night. OPSEC security process detection. Now I have installed malware on your system. I have to hide. And I do that by looking at the process list of security software that you're running on your environment. And once I understand what security software is running in your environment, I can actually now go through and do things to basically either turn the security software off, or I can hide myself again inside of existing processes so I can become undetected. And there's several different mechanisms that they do this with. There is a plugin script that's part of Cobalt Strike, which came from the NSA, called Process Cobra, which basically goes through and can quickly and easily fingerprint common security software, monitoring software, analysis software, and then be able to go into the process list and be able to shut them off, or be able to basically redirect the vectors of what they analyze, like being able to automatically add blacklists so that the monitoring software just ignores the new malware that's in it. Another one called Seatbelt is basically a tool that was built out of C++. So the same kind of thing is it can go through and it can basically enumerate everything that's in memory and then be able to go through and be able to help you identify how you want to change the process locations of applications running in memory. So again, you would not be detected. A lot of organizations are going to try to hide the security software in their environment by basically changing the security application name, right? So that it wouldn't be easily detected. Well, it turns out, even if you did that, the security software leaves a fingerprint in the process list, okay, called the driver name. And the thing about the driver name is it's always going to be the same, whether you change the name of the software or not. So what happens is these applications will look for the driver name, which is a value. And based upon that value, it will look to see what processes are running that maintain the driver name value, and then be able to make its decisions on how to disable or circumvent the software that way. Okay, so let's talk about how this thing worked in the SolarWinds supply chain attack. Back in December 2020, FireEye detected there was an attack event which became a global thing. It was backdoored into a whole bunch of stuff. They can't figure out where it came from, but they found it was related to what was happening with people using SolarWinds. Okay, this was very prevalent in the United States and Europe, especially in high-tech companies and government. In May of 2021, Microsoft discovered that there was a hacker group called Nobelium that was targeting government agencies and think tanks and enterprises, and they were using a Microsoft account that they were able to co-opt. And what they discovered was, based upon the account that they had co-opted, that Nobelium had somehow infected SolarWinds. This is how they discovered the attack had happened. Okay, why do we care? So there is something called the Sunburst backdoor, which is how the attacker was using SolarWinds to get into all the organizations. And it was in several different DLLs and SolarWinds exe files. Okay. The thing was, the minute you ran the DLL or the exe file, you automatically started doing a bunch of reconnaissance. Then you pushed out the stub to be able to download more malware. And that's it. So you can think of this as a variation of the living off the land, where basically they took a real application, they infected the real application, and then by basically hiding in the real application, which was a legitimate process, no one could detect what was going on. And that's a huge thing. Okay. The nice thing about this is they modified the original DLL somehow on the original SolarWinds server. So when everybody downloaded the DLL, they all had it, right? But because it now was signed, everybody was running a valid application at that point, right? The DLL loads, it has no new child processes that are not considered unauthorized. It runs properly. It does all the things it needs to go do. It just is able to do bad things because it's now being ignored by everything else. And that's the problem is, if it's a trusted process, everything it does becomes ignored. None of the software out there starts looking at it. The security software starts looking for it. So what the OPSEC technique that they used in SolarWinds was, it checked the environment after the DLL was turned on. And it looked to see where it was to determine whether it needs to enable itself or go to sleep. It had hash values, a whole list of different security products that are out there to be able to determine if those processes exist and determine whether they could shut them all off or go to sleep for a period of time, and then determine if the software had been re-enabled again. They went through and looked to see if there were other things where they were in the correct environment, such as, was this a company that was inside of Russia? Was it an RU domain? Was it an IP address that was friendly to Russia? And other kinds of things that it did to be able to turn itself on and off. So if you look at how the OPSEC technique works, you look at basically the backdoor, which was in the business layer DLL. It goes out and it connected to the hacker command and control server, which then allowed it to download new payloads onto the system, again, through a valid process because it's downloading valid files. And then it went through and it made some registry changes. When it made the registry changes, it hid the fact that it was downloading these other files and that they were going to run. So they were no longer going to be monitored or evaluated. Then when the new software was run, again, by SolarWinds, it went ahead and downloaded more stuff, created new processes, which were completely ignored. And you could see here that these new processes went through, they connected to the command and control server, exfiltrated data, and were able to modify the registries again to make sure it could hide itself from being detected. It was very, very sophisticated and very, very cool. But again, if you went and looked at any of these processes that were running, they all left their signed by SolarWinds digital certificate that came from Microsoft. There was nothing wrong. Okay, now, the part that's really interesting was SolarWinds ran 9 specific environment checks, and the software had to pass all 9 of these environment checks before it would decide to enable itself and run. If it failed any of these 9 checks, it went to sleep for a period of time, a month or more, turned itself back on again, and ran the environment checks again to see if these things still existed. It went again, looked to make sure that its process existed and it was running properly and nothing had changed it. And the hash value was there, so nobody replaced it with a valid version of the DLL file. It went ahead and looked to see if other processes running that it needed to find out, and if there's security software that was running, it disabled security software, went to sleep for a period of time, turned back on to see if anybody noticed security software had been disabled, and if it started back up again, it went back to sleep because they wouldn't be able to defeat the security software. If security software was still off, they would still continue to run and they would do bad things. It checked the domain of the device, looking for specific character strings and hash values to make sure that it wasn't in a Russian domain instead, or a Russian friendly domain or an IP address. Look to make sure the IP address it was running on was not on a blacklist, the blacklist being IP ranges that again were friendly to Russia, so they were ignored. It checked a whole bunch of other processes on there to see what was running to make sure that they would not be able to detect what was happening on the SolarWinds. And then it went ahead and checked to see whether or not that using a DNS request, it would parse properly and respond out to the DNS to the command control server. So again, this was very, very sophisticated in how this thing ran over a period of time. Okay, so we now know they use weaponized artificial intelligence in malware. How do we stop it? And the only way that you're going to be able to stop it is by using artificial intelligence to detect the low and slow behavior of this weaponized AI that's in malware today. So there are three basic techniques you can use, which is building behavior profiles of applications, network traffic, and users. And if I can build baselines of what all the applications in my environment are doing, what the network traffic looks like across all the systems, and what users are doing on any given point in time, I can then be able to detect anomalies based upon things that are anomalous or outside the norm of the baseline that's created. I can also look from the threat point of view where I know anomalies are happening in my environment. So what I need to do now is I need to look at how I track the behavior, and do I see clusters of anomalous behavior that happens? Am I seeing DNS requests going to places I've never seen them go before? Am I seeing users talking to systems they not normally talk to during business hours, or servers, for example, doing that kind of stuff? And then there is a lateral point of view as I start monitoring the traffic between systems internally, east-west systems, to determine, am I seeing systems talking to other systems on a wider scale? Am I seeing systems talking to other systems they shouldn't be talking to? Do I see a admin workstation trying to get access to the SAP server on an admin control port? Am I seeing somebody in finance trying to get access to the GitHub server, getting access to all the technical data? If you can track this kind of behavior, which is very low and slow, you'd be able to then determine there's a lot of malicious stuff happening in the environment. So using baselines to find anomalies, there's a whole bunch of techniques that do that. Basically, I look at something, I look at a user, and the user comes to work every day from 9 to 5. They do all this stuff 9 to 5, and they go home. Then all of a sudden now I see the user trying to log into the system and do things at 2 a.m. on a Sunday morning, which he never does. That's anomalous behavior that goes against the baseline. If I'm looking at what normal internet access looks like, I'm seeing where people are going to all the normal places again. All my servers are going to talk to the same kind of places, and all of a sudden now I see my servers going to talk to servers in other places they've never done before. That becomes a problem. And then correlations. I want to be able to take more than one event. I want to be able to relate them together to see if that would help me determine behavior. So I may look at software. I may look at what it talks to. I may look at the time of day that it's going to. I may look to see if I go and do any kind of vulnerability scan to see, was I vulnerable to anything? So all of a sudden I'm seeing a vulnerability happening. I'm seeing traffic going to a specific kind of command and control server. That could help me identify if I'm affected by specific kinds of malware. The idea then is, if you have an AI system that can do this as continuous self-learning, it will update signatures, because as it finds new things, it'll hash them, and then it will create a signature for them, because that way we don't have to go through the whole process of having to reanalyze something again, right? At the end of the day, signature matching is the fastest way to go do it. The problem is not to rely too much on a external signature database, because it's going to get overwhelmed by stuff. AV Test has identified that there's over 500,000 new malware signatures every day that it gets, right? And if antivirus says they can block it 99.5%, that is still several thousand potential malware that can get to your environment that's being missed by the signature database, because it's just not in there. But if the AI can find it, AI can learn what that signature is, you can automatically add it to the AI database so that it downloads it to all customer products, and it will have that new signature in place within a very short period of time. The big thing about this is, when we talk about these kinds of behaviors, you can't have one general AI model looking at everything. It's not going to work. You have to have very specific purpose-built models looking for very specific kinds of activity, like DNS hidden tunnels or the DGA domain names, or looking at how encrypted traffic is talking to command and control servers on a low and slow basis, okay, or other kinds of things. So the idea here is, by having AI models that look for very specific kinds of traffic over longer periods of time, they can detect very specific things. And once that AI model triggers, it can then say, hey, has anybody else seen this? And it can then correlate with other information, other IOCs, or other data coming from other AI models to determine whether this is a potentially valid attack or valid breach. Here's a use case that we did something like this. We actually had a smart car manufacturing organization where they were seeing a lot of their new technology being replicated by competitors almost within a few days or even before they could release their own stuff. They didn't think anything of it until we came in and we did an analysis of what was going on, and we discovered that several systems in the organization have been infiltrated, including the PC of the R&D manager. And what happened was the PC of the R&D manager was basically talking to other infected systems, pulling data from those systems, and then being able to package it up on itself. And then it would then go out and make bursty traffic for about 4 or 5 minutes every night or every couple nights to domain using the GGA type names. So you see tens of thousands of requests go out in just a few minutes. And what it was doing was it was packaging the data together and then chopping it all up and then exfiltrating it out in these GGA requests. Okay, and it went to a Russian command and control server, which was a big thing. The thing about this, because it only did this every few days and it only did it for just a few minutes, you know, it took about a week for us to discover this activity. But once we found it and our AI could hone in on it, it was very easy to track after that point. Okay, so the takeaways from all of this is basically, you know, AI is becoming more ubiquitous. Cyber criminals are using it pretty much everything because they can, right? And we're falling behind because, you know, they got more time to spend using the AI and doing stuff with it. And traditional security products that currently exist don't really have as much AI in there as we'd like it to be in there. But we now know we need to have AI to fight AI. And hopefully the AI that you have is going to be smarter than the AI of the stuff coming from the attackers. Because at the end of the day, you have to be able to determine these attack behavior points, which can be very slow, very difficult to detect over long periods of time. It's a cat and mouse game because the minute the bad guys discover that you figured out how to detect this, they're going to try to change it up. And actually, I have another presentation that talks more about how they change it up so that once they figure out you detected something, they try to go and change their tactics so that you won't be able to detect it for much longer. The important thing is you want to work with a partner and a security vendor who has a good track record of using AI in their products, and not just, again, a general purpose AI model, but a product that uses, you know, multiple AI models looking for very specific kinds of behavior to be able to find very specific kinds of things, whether it's user-based, encrypted network traffic-based, even application-based, okay? And can they find this behavior not just within the organization that's being done laterally east-west, but especially if I'm in a hybrid environment, can I detect things that are happening not just on-premise, but also in the cloud? Okay. And do they have the ability to use AI in the cloud to be able to take advantage of scale to be able to do better processing that you couldn't do on-premise? The last part of this is the security software business risk aware so that it can figure out, based upon the business criticality of the asset, whether the priority should be on this asset or something else. You know, if I see a SAP server on the inside that's doing bad things, and I see a e-commerce server on the internet that's been hit by a vulnerability with a 7.0, you know, which one should I deal with first? Well, doing analysis by business criticality, I'm going to determine that some things might be more important on the web-facing server because it can cause more damage than the SAP server, which is internal organization and doesn't really go out and do anything. So again, you want to have the capability to not just use the AI, but to be able to put the context of the business in with how the AI is parsing out the data. Okay, the last step here is, you know, organizations don't know if they've been infected. One of the things that we've pushed to this year is Sangfor has gone away from the we're going to be able to detect and block everything because we know it's not possible. And Sangfor's new approach to security now is you've been infected. Don't know how long you've been infected, but you've already been infected. Because whatever security product you have is best effort, and it's probably going to be circumvented.
Guy, you have to wrap up.
Yeah, I'm almost done.
In 1 minute.
Yep. So the idea here is contact your partner or your security vendor and have them come do an assessment in your organization to look to see if you've been breached, to find the breadcrumbs of this infected malware. Okay, we've got some resources you can go to our website that can talk more about APT trends and the ransomware and other kinds of stuff in terms of how this malware works. Otherwise, you can drop me an email and I'd be happy to contact you guys, or you can talk to Vicky, and we'd be happy to provide you more resources about how to look for these kinds of AI-enabled malware. And with that, I thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you, guys.
you.
Thank you, guys. Interesting topic.
Yeah, so it's AI versus AI.
So we have a comment right away from our viewer, Mr. MLE and Cisonero. He said that combat AI adversaries with AI plus human intel still more powerful than AI alone.
Agree.
Yes.
Agree.
Especially those who are in the field. No? AI with the human minds is still very powerful, but very interesting presentation, Guy. No,
We agree with that. I have another part of the presentation I didn't get there, but we believe the same thing is AI by itself is not going to do it. You have to have the human intellect part that's in there, because at the end of the day, the best correlation engine in the world is still the human mind.
it's
You can
still a
still do
human.
things that
Yeah,
AI
yeah.
can, right?
That is correct. Are you willing to share your presentation, Guy, or
Yeah, we'll make the presentation available to you after this is done.
okay, that's good news for our viewers. Mr. Guy here is willing to share his presentation, and BP Alex, do you have? Did you remember we investigated the same?
SolarWinds, yes.
Yep, right. That
Yeah,
was
we
really.
We did a very detailed, Mr. Chair, very detailed reverse engineering on what happened in SolarWinds. But the notable thing there, Guy discussed already the SolarWinds hack, right? Remember to the audience, when the SolarWinds hack first was launched, so big companies like Cisco, Intel, Microsoft, they were all affected, no? So the truth is that the malwares are getting intelligent as well, and they are evading already technologies, no, yung mga security controls natin. So yun yung mas nakakatakot na hinaharap natin ngayon, Mr. Chair, no? So agree, nakakatakot.
Agree. But before that, VP Alex, let's welcome our Vice Chair, Mr. Oscar Bisaya.
Vice Chair, welcome.
Thank you.
And watching us is our National President, Mr. President Ace Asidilio, and the National Capital Region Chapter President Miss Jen.
Kutikta.
And Miss Jen has a comment. How can AI or ML benefits? How can AI ML benefits outweigh the risks, such as lack of transparency, possible violation to data privacy, legal and reputational consequences, etc.? How can it outweigh the benefits?
That's actually a very good question. So there's two things that happen in that. Number one, let's talk about the privacy issue. The privacy issue is based upon the data that the AI is going to collect. So in most cases, from a transparency perspective, most vendors are pretty transparent in terms of what data that their AI is going to collect. We are, in terms of what our models do, and depending on where you are, it may or may not cause a privacy issue. For example, we collect, target IP addresses. Unfortunately, for GDPR, a target IP address is considered sensitive information because it can actually map back to a person. So again, depending on the region you're in, it depends on what your requirements are. But most organizations are trying very hard to not only be transparent in terms of the data they collect for the processing and the analysis, and to make sure that they only take key metadata that's necessary for the purpose of identifying threats, and not grabbing information that's important, such as I don't necessarily have to carry the username, for example, or the phone number, or any user credential information. That's not necessarily in terms of doing this kind of analysis. And at the same time, if I'm using a bunch of AI models, it would be nice if the system had a dashboard that could at least show you what the A model was doing in terms of building the behavior baseline or in terms of statistics that it kicked through. So again, a lot of the systems that are becoming more AI dependent, they are putting in the dashboard so you can actually see what's happening behind the scenes.
Very good. According to Chris Brian Realubin, our Pix Pro chapter president in Ilocos Sur, no, in Vigan. Human input for AI improvement. Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. So one of the slides I didn't get to present is we actually have several different kinds of learning. There's what's called supervised, unsupervised, and a hybrid. And basically, what the type of learning you use is based upon whether the system automatically grabs data unsupervised and tries to figure stuff out. There's supervised, where basically you feed it defined sets of good data that it can learn from to understand normal behavior, or bad sets of data that can understand bad behavior they can learn from. So that the human element gets involved in that. Then there's the hybrid supervised, unsupervised, where basically the system takes in the unsupervised data, it does a bunch of learning, and then the human goes in afterwards, looks at the model, and manually refines it. So those processes are still there and available from a machine learning point of view. The human is never going to go away. That's a very important thing, because at the end of the day, I'm not going to say I can't trust AI because it's going to, find the singularity and we're all going to go into Terminator. That's not going to happen. But, algorithms are built by humans. Humans make mistakes. Algorithms may have limitations to them. So you still need to have a human in the loop to be able to verify and validate the data.
And just to share then, VP Nia, Mr. Chairman and Vice Chair, so right now I'm already in the field, doing everyday calls with the customers, So what I found out, siguro in my less than 2 months enterprise, PLDT enterprise, a lot of customers are already being affected by ransomware. As a matter of fact, there is one manufacturing customer that we help. So I asked help from the team of Mr. Chairman Angel, our PLDT forensic investigation team, who did a detailed investigation on a malware attack with one of our customers. Boson malware yung tumama sa kanya, mga ka-Pix Pro. So nakakalungkot kasi yung mga customers, they tend to downplay cybersecurity, and with the advancement and intelligence nitong mga malware na to, the defenses are down and they get infected. So hindi sana ganun yung conversation kung right from the start they want their posture to be strong in terms of cybersecurity. Thank you nga pala, nandito Mr. Chair, yung mga tao mo, sila Buboy, Edward, tsaka si Andre. Thank you for the help on that malware incident. Salamat po, Mr. Chair.
Nice one, VP Alex. VP Alex, just a question,
Yes.
regarding the attack techniques that were mentioned earlier, yung mga BYOB, leaving of the land, sorry. Is this something that you also experienced today, or
Yeah.
Yeah?
As a matter of fact, the last ransomware that we had with the customer, the same tactic and techniques were used. Fortunately for the customer, the behavior of the malware cannot do lateral movement, and it just only encrypt the data. Imagine that if the ransomware, a major ransomware hits them and all of their assets were, infected, so much catastrophic effect on their organization.
Right. Let us also welcome, we have from Sangfor, am I right? Mr. Nerwin Pagulayan, am I right?
You're correct. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
He is the country manager of Sangfor here in the Philippines. Welcome.
Welcome, and
Welcome,
thank you
Nervin.
for.
Welcome.
I think your operation is also nationwide, right, Nervin?
Exactly, sir. Exactly. So we cater from the northern Luzon up to the Vismin regions.
It's really good that we connected, because we are able to get to know Sangfor, and you have the expertise like Guy here, who is undoubtedly very well versed
Experience.
and
Well-versed.
technically in depth, no, when it comes to security. Like when I was listening earlier, I can only shake my head, no, because of these capabilities of our enemies. They are growing day by day in terms of sophistication, and like BP Alex mentioned, the community is lagging in terms of coping up with new threats and new techniques. But Nervin, maybe you can educate our viewers about Sangfor in the Philippines, and how your company can be a partner to the entities that we have in this chat group, and those who are viewing us from different areas in the Philippines. We have viewers from Cavite, Batangas, North. We also have viewers in Cagayan de Oro, I believe, and Davao, of course. No?
So dami
Go
pala
ahead,
tayong
Nervin.
viewers, no? Yun, so thank you, no, for the group of Pix Pro for having Sangfor. And for Sangfor Philippines, no, there are a lot of things that we could do, especially in security. And for those, no, especially in attendance today, we do offer services for security wherein if you do have encounter or you encounter yung the likes of ransomware or any cyber attack, no, you could coordinate with the Sangfor team, and we could provide you initial assessment and mitigation of the attacks. No? So basically, the purpose is to help not only to mitigate, but give you an insight on how to defend yourself against the same attack, no? In the future, or the possibilities of there could be the loophole could be happening on the end user, on the network configurations, and we could help on those. And we're not only limited into the services. We have security devices that could give reactive, because right now at the moment what we have in security is we have reactive protection, which is yung mga firewall natin, endpoints, no, that provides us the protection, no, na kailangan natin in order to defend ourselves to these different enemies that we have for cybersecurity. But the protection kasi it's reactive again. So and we educate, no, the different devices, security devices specifically that we have on the network. But then again, no, we need to be proactive. And on that case, no, that is where yung mga services natin comes in. And then we have devices or services as well, and technologies, no, na available na sa market. And Sangfor do have it ngayon, network detection and response, which is very proactive. So ang mga protection kasi natin, it reacts only to what is happening na sa network natin. But you wanted to check kung ano yung mga possible risks ng business mo, ng vulnerabilities, no? What are the things, no, that you don't know about your network. The NDR technology is there to help. So those are the things that we offer for the nationwide Philippines. So we do have our Facebook page, no? Kung for the listener, no, it's free yung ano natin, yung mitigation natin for ransomware. If you do experience, no, you're under attack, feel free to get in touch, no, on our Facebook page, and someone will respond immediately para matulungan namin kayo. It's free service, no payments for those. Ayun.
Well, that's very encouraging, and that's good news, no? When you are under cyber attack, you know whom to call. That's the Sangfor team. And VP Mia, there's a comment from the NCR chapter president. Zero-day exploits have been attributed to hacking or cybercrime groups. has there been any signs that different cybercrime groups and indeed banding together to form cybercrime cartels?
Wow. Good
You know,
jury.
President Jen, I wrote an article about this in 2013 or 2014 yata, no? Entitled "The Growing Underground Market." As early as those times, we already have what we call the cybercrime to cybercrime market. Wherein one cyber criminal group will buy the services or tools of another cyber criminal group. They're not necessarily banding together like friends or like socials, but they are working together because they realize that the underground market in cyber related is growing. It's a big money. No? It's big money. In 2011, there was an article that came out, a study by one of the cybersecurity research group, that the hackers all over the world earned $12 billion total. And I think half of that went to the Russian hackers and half was divided among different groups of hackers. So ito yung sinasabi natin, Vice Chair, na the bad guys are working together. The good guys are still working in silo.
Yeah. Oo nga, Mr. Chair, sabi mo $12 billion yung yung hacker business outcome.
Yeah. 2011.
Yeah, 2011 yun. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ngayon kasi, I think I just read the market size globally for cybersecurity. It's about $192 billion eh.
Wow.
So now from 2011 to now, maybe that has quadrupled or quadrupled. So maybe the total market size in the cybersecurity hacking business might be a good percentage of the total cybersecurity market. No? So I think it's still a growing business. And I think I like what Nervin mentioned about being proactive with all the assessments and leveraging technologies like AI to be able to protect ourselves. Actually, the goal is to be ahead of the hackers. If there is such a term as, to be ahead of the hackers. I think we have examples of companies here in the Philippines who are ahead of hackers now. And they're more successful in preventing themselves against cyber attacks. So now I have a question, Guy. I think the efficacy of any AI modeling is dependent on the data input. So now data, how good data is and so on, but it also makes the overall solution maybe expensive. How do you address the data question in the AI model?
Well, so the idea is who's doing the data, right? The thing about a good vendor, security vendor, they have a security threat intelligence team in place, and they should be pulling data from their devices. Like Sangfor does, we have hundreds of thousands of devices deployed all over the world, and many of those devices who opt in send data back to us. So we see event data, we see threat data, we see IOCs, which we can then go and use that to be able to put into our threat intelligence, to be able to refine what attacks are, and then use that to train our AI models, right? So that becomes a very important thing. If you have a big enough ecosystem, you should be able to be pulling in good real world data to be able to do this, right? If not, there are third-party organizations, there are research organizations, A/B test, VB, and other kind of places that you can go to where you can download data sets that are considered valid for the purpose of training devices. So there are lots of things you can do to make that happen. In terms of a cost perspective, again, if you have the infrastructure already in place, I've got lots of customers, I'm pulling data from them automatically. If they opt in to go do that, I've already built an engine that does this in the cloud to do the analysis, then there's no cost that's passed on to the customer other than potentially to buy the TI feed, as a subscription, right? I would like to address the comment about the the Sangfor has seen two interesting types of behavior happen in the last couple of years. Number one, we have seen several ransomware groups get disbanded, and then they secretly come back as a different group. Revil is one of them, as a matter of fact. So, we may not see, it may look like a cartel because there's all of a sudden you see this new hacker group, which has a lot of the assets of the old hacker group, but it's basically the old group with a new name. That's a big thing. We're also seeing a lot of crime as a service, ransomware as a service, DDoS as a service, all this kind of stuff, where for as little as $30, I could launch a huge botnet attack against somebody, or I could start a large ransomware campaign. And if the ransomware campaign is successful, then I split the profits with the service, right? So we're seeing a lot of these types of reorganizations and confluences, but not necessarily, as I said, a big, a big partnership of different groups together to do stuff. Because at the end of the day, these groups themselves are all within about self-interest. They want to see how much money they can make, and they won't share with anybody else, right? Why would I want to share with another cartel group when I can take all the money for myself? So there's a lot of greed that's part of the motivation that keeps that from happening.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very clearly explained.
There's a very nice comment from Chris. He said, I think the biggest problem in the Philippines is that businesses do not believe that they are prone to hacking or ransack of data until they are actually hit by it.
Yes, that's true, VP Mia, based sa experience ko sa field na yun, So kausap lang namin yung customer maybe a few days, They are presenting, proper cybersecurity practice, etc., etc., and they are not interested. And then when the time comes that they get breached, they will call PLDT. PLDT, please help us because we get ransomware, or we get defaced, or we get. So the customer only realize the value of cybersecurity if indeed an attack or a successful breach happened to them. So we should change that mindset already.
And that becomes very expensive for them, right? More expensive.
Exactly.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
I am mesmerized by the topic.
Yeah.
I am already thinking about our environment, our organization, looking at the different techniques.
I can feel you, Mr. Chair.
I cannot help but think already about what can be done and how we can improve. But I think the biggest question for every one of us, not only for Guy, is what is the right AI technology in terms of vendors that can provide at least the highest level and the widest coverage in terms of protecting an organization.
Now,
Guy.
I would personally think Sangfor would be one of those that could do that. Sangfor has a very strong research organization that built AI. One of our biggest products is a threat hunting product called Cyber Command, which we use to do incident response and to look for these AI detections. And it itself has over 16 AI purpose-built models built in, looking for the different kinds of behavior we're talking about, right? So it basically is sucking in network traffic to a sensor. It's pulling in endpoint data from endpoints. It's pulling in application data from firewalls as a sensor, and correlating all that stuff together, being able to look for these low and slow behaviors that as a human you wouldn't be able to see looking at a log, or even a SIM wouldn't be able to find in many cases, right? But the most important thing is you can take this technology and output information back to the SIM, and the SIM could then correlate what we found with the other events that it finds to be able to make sure that we have low false positives.
Well, I think that is a perfect statement to end the session, no? And we'd definitely be seeing more of Sangfor and their capabilities in our next cases and trainings. Since we are already 5 minutes past our time slot. Maybe VP Mia, let's ask Miss Vicky here, anything she can impart to our viewers, no, before we end the session.
Yeah, sorry for the noise. I think there's a crowd crying near us. So yeah, again, thank you so much, Pexco Board of Directors, for inviting Sangfor Philippines, Sangfor Technologies. Yeah, sorry, there's a child crying. But yeah,
Okay.
thank you so much for everyone. If you need any IT security solutions, we can help you. Just let us know. Of course, we are very glad to be partnering with Pexco. So that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Miss Vicky.
Thank you, Vicky.
Now the rundown. VP Mia, your turn.
Yes. So this won't be the last time we're hosting Sangfor, no. So there will be other sessions, and they will also be doing a webinar, and they will also provide trainings for us. So Vicky and Guy, we look forward to that, and thank you so much for joining us today. We are 6 minutes past 6. So, Mr. Chair, yung ating, palagi ako nagkakamali eh. So, it's better na sa'yo
Teka,
manggalo.
si Seven hosting. Late, super late. So, ikaw magpapakape. Oh, and VP Sheila is also watching us, no? So, once again, we missed you guys. Last Friday, people were tired because of our first ever Pix Pro Golf Cup for a cause. But now we're back, and you'll be seeing us again every Friday. So we usually say happy weekend, everyone. But in cybersecurity, happy lang, walang weekend. Thank you, guys. Thank you,
Thank you,
Sangfor.
guys. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Happy weekend.
Thank you so
Happy
much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay na, Vice Chair.
Nasa opisina pa.